Good. Fantastic. Okay. Hello, everyone. You're all very welcome to this panel. Please come in and take your seat. I hope you all had a birthday muffin. Okay, we're closing the door and we are off. So my name is Sandra Collins. I'm the University Librarian at University College Dublin in Ireland, and I'm a member of the RDA Council. And it's an absolute pleasure. I'm so thrilled to be doing this panel here with you today, because following on from that wonderful opening session where we really got a sense of the impact and the work of RDA over the last 10 years, this is a little piece of reflection now, some personal thoughts and wishes and ideas and reflections from an absolutely fabulous panel. So I'm delighted. Our panel is going to be a mix of some of our founding members. They're people that were here 10 years ago, and some of our rising stars from the next generation of RDA. So that's really going to allow us to look back and look forward as well. Now, we're joined by everybody here in the audience, and we have all our viewers online. You'll be most welcome to ask a question. We're going to do opening thoughts and questions to start with. And if you have a question, Alessandra will be able to help us here in the room and also take questions online. So I was thinking this is such a special occasion to be here for the 10th birthday. It was lovely to hear that there's 30 or 40 people that were at that conference 10 years ago and here again today. But it's really exciting to think about the 13,000 members that have joined, new members over those years, and everything they bring here as well. My personal memory of joining the RDA was John Wood visited the Royal Irish Academy, the Academy for Arts and Science in Ireland at the time, and wanted to get the academies to come to this meeting and be a part of the conversation at the RDA. So I got on the plane and with a sense of what is this, what is it going to be? And when I arrived here, to feel the energy and the expertise, and it really felt like the right people in the room having the right conversation at the right time. And in a fit of enthusiasm, I spoke to Ross and Andrew and volunteered that Ireland would partner with Australia to host the 3rd RDA conference. And then I had to go home and tell my wonderful colleague, Natalie Harwer, she's going to be working on it for a year to make it happen. And if you were there, your memory might be of the Irish dancers entering into the room and jumping up on the tables at the conference dinner for the Irish dancing entertainment. So it's really been a wild ride over those 10 years. So just before we kick off, just to put that context, so to look back 10, 12, 13 years, and to think that in 2010, John Wood was chairing the, working with the European Commission to write and launch the Riding the Wave report. And that was one of those seminal pieces of thinking that led into the creation of the RDA. And at the same time, in the United States, independently, but of the same moment, we had Fran Berman leading the Blue Ribbon Task Force, and we had Alan the techie and Chris Gear writing that discussion paper, setting out that organizational vision for something like RDA. And in Australia, we had Ross and Andrew here in the room joining into that discussion as well. So it really was, it's really bringing all that intellectual leadership, that thought leadership together at the right moment that has led to where we are today. So let's get into the conversation now. We're going to do a little bit of look back and a little bit of look forward. We've 6 wonderful panelists here. So I'm going to start from the far side, and that's Connie Clare, RDA Community Manager in the RDA Foundation. Then next to Connie is Catherine Barker, and she's RDA Community Manager in the Australia Research Data Commons, ARDC. Then we have Julia German, and she's a PhD student and scientific associate at the University of Cologne and the University Hospital in Cologne at the Institute for Biomedical Informatics. Then we're joined by Beth Plale. Beth is the director of the Data to Insight Center at the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing and Engineering in Indiana University. She's also the RDA TAB founding co-chair, and she will shortly be leading RDA in the USA. Then we're joined by Ross Wilkinson. Ross is one of the original founding council members and former CEO of the Australia National Data Service. And last but not least is John Wood, who is again one of the RDA founding council members, one of the first 3, and chair of Riding the Wave. So to kick us off into this discussion, John, can I ask you first, how did Riding the Wave come about and what were you trying to achieve with it?
Oh gosh, perhaps I want to start by saying, why on earth am I here? Because I'm a material scientist and I spent my whole life putting atoms where they didn't want to be. I call myself an atomic anarchist. I went to a meeting at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory in the year 2000 to talk about micro-machining motors that would go into your arteries, okay? Out of that, I ended up as head of the Rutherford Appleton and Daresbury laboratories. And my first day, I had to go to a meeting on managing metadata. I had no idea what it was all about. It was all about Globus. Is it around still? I don't know. Anyway, and very quickly, Keith Jeffrey, who I think is here. Are you here, Keith?
He is.
Yeah, hi, Keith. Came into my office and started talking to me about data. And very quickly followed by Tony Hay, who was leading the e-science program in the UK. Many of us know Tony. And I had a meeting that summer with a group of 5 countries looking at the future of research infrastructures. And that was Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and the UK. The rest of Europe were rather unhappy about this. And so in the end of 2001, which is when this really all started, we had a meeting in Brussels to look at the future of research infrastructures. And that's when the European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructure was formed. I became the second chair of that and put together the proposal for the first roadmap. But it became increasingly clear that scientific data was going to be core to all of this. I reflected on when I was doing my PhD at Cambridge, it used to take a day, 24 hours for me to get one X-ray trace. And the chart paper would go along the whole of this from here, okay? And I had to get a meter rule and go along. These days, the free electron laser in Hamburg turns out 1 billion data points every second, okay? So I went from 1 in 24 hours to 1 billion in a second. So that was what was going on. And we could all see that data handling was going to be a major issue. Well, I then became chairman of the European Research Area Board, and we saw the impact of open science previously I'd been the UK's lead on open access, and I've got every publisher's stab in the back, by the way, to prove that. If you know what we went through then, it was really quite nasty. And I then had a phone call from Kostas Glinos in what was DG Information Society at that time, said, would you lead a high-level group on the future of scientific data? I said, Kostas, I know nothing about it. He said, that's precisely why we've asked you. And I had a group of experts. I know one of them is here today, Francois Genova.
Yes.
Where are you, Francois? You're there somewhere. I've just seen you. Yeah. And a group of other people who knew what they were talking about. And we had a wonderful time. We started off in Mons in Belgium. Henri Lefontaine's collection of articles that he collected, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize in whenever it was, 1900 something or other. And we then went off to a monastery for 2 or 3 days, which made their own wine and olive oil, and we walked in the woods. And out of that, we started developing scenarios that are in riding the wave. And we got back, and we then went to Francois's, well, the Paris Observatory, and looked at their records. And we pulled up a picture of the history of data, as it were. And it became clear to all of us that this couldn't be just a European thing. So I was in discussions with the National Science Foundation and with the Australian Science whatever it was in Brussels, and we could see that this was coming together. And we wrote, well, we didn't write Riding the Wave, actually. There are 2 bits of my original text in there. There were probably 1 bit of Francois's, maybe a bit more. And it was, this is key. This really is key. We got a journalist to write it, who knew exactly how to write it in a political way. And he also did the other one, the data harvest. And if you want to get your message over to politicians, get somebody to write it in the language that politicians understand. And Eva Herzog challenged me in the Library of Congress about this and when we had a meeting with members of the European Parliament. And she set my whole mind on, actually, we had to sell this to the politicians as much as to the scientists. And then we had meetings with the Competitive Council, that's the ministers in the European Commission, on open science. And that's how it all took off, really. So I suddenly switched from bunging atoms around to apparently knowing something about data.
Thanks, John. And Ross, you were there too, right? You were one of the founders of RDA. So what was it like setting up this entity, and why was it established this way, this structure, why did you take this approach?
So first of all, what did it feel like? It felt like, for me, and you will resonate with this, it was exhausting. Because the meetings were late at night and there was lots of travel, etc. It was fun because while it was exhausting, it was terrific to work with a bunch of people who would form this wonderful community. It was empowering because we had been given permission by the very bureaucrats that John's talking about to do this. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but that empowerment was really important. But it felt very important to do it, that we established this community to achieve what we're doing now. That's the feelings for me: exhaustion, fun, excitement, passion, but all of those things together. But for me, why it happened this way is there's been a lot of talk about top-down, but I think the comments that we had from the perspective of Sweden and the institutions was really important, because if you're going to try to achieve the vision that we kind of had, which is that data is transformed from being a researcher problem to being a global asset, you've got to look at it in all of the different dimensions. So that's political, it's organizational, it's people, it's technology, it's a whole lot of different things. And so for me, RDA's existence was partially about being empowered by some visionary and courageous civil servants. So I want to call out Chris Greer, Alan Blatecki, Carlos, Kostas, and Claire McLaughlin as being courageous public servants, because it was difficult to say, we've got a really important problem and we're not going to control the answer. We're going to hand it over to a community who could turn into a rabble or could turn into what we've achieved. So it's wonderful to see what has been achieved, but it was very interesting to be empowered. But what some of you will see less is the strength of RDA's connections to organisations and to funders, because those things are really important, because what we can achieve through this community is empower and enable, but you have to have the policy levers as well to make those sorts of things happen. And so it was really interesting, if you like, to see almost an experiment in, can you enable and empower a community to deliver something that's important to the world? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes. So that's for me why it was set up the way it was, because it was actually this mixture of top down and bottom up is kind of how it's described, but it was really about the community engagement, working with institutions, with funders, with commercial players, etc. So that wasn't an unhappy place for anybody to come, whether it's sort of old fogies or bright new talent, whether it's an organisation that's worried about whether or not they're going to be able to survive in a new world, etc. It's a very welcoming environment, and I hope it was set up that way. It certainly felt 10 years ago that it was a nice group of people to work with, and gosh, it's fun to be back.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Joss. Woo! It always struck me that the organization that you set up is so robust, but it was built for ambition, and it was built to grow to the scale it has. Like, you didn't need this, you know, the mix of the working groups and the governance. You didn't need all that for 230 people, but it works so well, and it still works now when it's scaled up to 13,000. So that ambition, I think, was there from the start. Beth, can I ask you, you've been here from the start as well. You've been a key contributor and one of the founders, original co-chairs of TAB. How has RDA changed over time? And can you see it mature? And is there something else we need to do to keep supporting the research ecosystem?
Great, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. Russ, thank you for the, and John, for the observations, and particularly with respect to some of the connections that were made and the people that were out there, particularly from funding agencies that were taking a bet and with success, I think. So yeah, thank you for those observations. I'm going to dive in just a little bit, just because Andrew Treller and I were the inaugural co-chairs of the Technical Advisory Board. So I went back to the 2014 timeframe when we were trying to make sense of the 50, what was a little under 50 working groups and interest groups at the time. So I was digging out some mappings and clusterings that we had done, talking to Ross about them last night in the bar. We did two different things. I have two observations to make. So one of them was a clustering that we did along a couple dimensions, an X and Y axis. And the X axis doesn't really matter, but what was important to the story here is the Y axis. We, by hand, clustered all of the working group and interest group activity into either a technically oriented solution or what we called at the time a socially oriented solution, which meant it was, people decisions, people processes, people vocabularies, things like that were, legal implications, things like that. The observation was that fully half of the activity that was going on in RDA at the time was in this social dimension, which one would look at a decade later and say, well, yeah, of course. It was eye-opening at the time. It was totally eye-opening at the time. And I think it holds true today that an organization like this that brings people together to address some of these problems, which take people consensus and people processes, I think is critical. So anyway, it was eye-opening at the time is probably the big observation there. The second observation, and this was some activity, also clustering activity, that a fellow, so in the US, we had Sloan Foundation funded RDA data share fellows program. And one of the fellows did a clustering activity, and his name is Nick Weber. You may know him. He's now faculty at University of Washington, very successful. But I went back and looked at his clustering diagram and two observations. One of them is because he was clustering based on size of the activity, size of the activity and the number of edges into and out of that activity to other activities. So the bulk of the activity in 2014 was in the working groups. There were about 5 or 6 core working groups that were connected everywhere and represented quite a bit of the activity, which I thought that would be interesting to see what that activity looks like today, but that's what it was in circa 2014. Another observation that I found interesting is, when one looks at comparable titles of working groups and interest groups in the 2014 timeframe, it was titled this is an exact title, Legal Interoperability of Research Data. And if you look at a comparable title today, it is Ethics of AI and Data Visitation. Which again, I know one's legal and one's ethics. I get that. But if one looks at the specificity of what's going on today, data visitation is a very specific topic. AI ethics is a very specific topic. And the bringing those two together is even more specific a topic compared to 2014, when the topics, if you look at the names of the working groups and interest groups alone, was very broad. And I think what that suggests is what we have available to us a decade later is now, if we look now in terms of impact, it's not necessarily this product goes to this adoption. Because these are more specific, I think their composition is more meaningful. So I do think we have the capacity now, 10 years later, to harness portfolios of products into solutions. And that's where I think we need to, certainly in the United States, where I think we need to go forward. So I think we're at a nexus point of opportunity that it's taken 10 years to get to. And I'll just make one more comment here. And that is that, I had to step back. I went to the National Science Foundation in the United States for 3 years. And at that time I was heavily conflicted. So I had to step way back from the activity going on in the Research Data Alliance. So I've now roped back in. But I just wanted to offer my appreciation for people who have stuck with the commitment and the vision that is RDA over a decade. That's a long time to stay committed to something. And it takes that long to realize a community-oriented activity, and particularly with the kinds of complex challenges that take consensus on numerous points to bring progress. So I just wanted to call attention to those people. I'm impressed with people's engagement.
Thanks, Beth. I think that's so true. And it really is it feels like a special moment to be here in the life cycle of RDA, that it has grown up and matured enough that we really can meaningfully look to the long-term future and RDA leading that. So Julia, I'm going to come to you next. Julia, I think you were saying this is your first RDA plenary. So you are most welcome. And you're going to explain to us a bit, kind of give us your reflections on what are the biggest challenges facing early career and doctorate researchers. And you might tell us personally, why are you engaging with RDA and what benefits do you hope to get out of it?
Hey, yeah. First of all, I want to thank you for the warm welcome to all of you. So to all of whom I spoken during the last days, it was very open, very friendly, and I appreciate this community a lot, and it has been great so far already. Yeah, coming to your questions. I think if you are an early career researcher, just left university, it's the first time in your life that you have working on a very specific field. Before in your education, it was a lot broader. And now you have this specialization to a very narrow field where you do your research in. But still, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of infrastructures, a lot of organizations which you haven't heard of before. And I personally felt a bit of overwhelmed by all of that. And every day I discovered something new and felt a bit, almost dumb that I didn't know it before. And I didn't know whether that's normal, that you have these insecurities, that you have these doubts. But and also I felt a lack of orientation somehow. So I mean, I have great colleagues. I also have a great director at my institute who provide orientation, but still personally, you are overwhelmed by all the opportunities and all the new things, the new terms you discover. And I hope that, or I actually see today and also yesterday, that RDA can help with these insecurities. You meet a lot of people. I now already heard a lot of talks where people reported problems that I also see in my work. So I wrote my master thesis at the University Hospital Cologne about challenges in reusing medical routine data for research. So to extract the medical data from the primary clinical systems and work with them in research, which is highly challenging because of the sensitivity of the data and all the data protection, which is definitely needed, but puts research at a challenging position. So I saw these challenges and I thought I cannot really change anything, but with this community, I think we can change something. And I think that's something very important I can take from RDA, this community, this contacts, this collaborative work towards a global solution for these problems.
That's really good to hear. Thank you, Julia. And I think our Secretary General always refers to RDA as a family, and I hope it feels like that. Welcome to the family.
Thank you.
So, Catherine, moving on to you and your role as RDA Community Manager in Australia. What do you think are the big challenges in continuing to grow and engage the RDA community?
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to echo what Julia has just said. Thank you for the invitation. And this is also my first plenary, so it's really wonderful to be here and meet everybody. It is extremely friendly and welcoming. And yeah, it's a good start to my, to my role. I've just started in the role. I started end of last year. So for sure, there are a lot of challenges I think we have. So when I was preparing for this panel event, I was just thinking, what are the challenges? But maybe we can reframe the question slightly. It's also a lot of opportunity down in the global south. We're hearing a lot about the global south at the moment. I think it's a huge area for expansion and for really growing the community down there. So not alone, of course. I have the support of the ARDC and the wonderful team that are there, and like a lot of history there and a lot of expertise. But as an RDA community manager, where do I start? So I was thinking that really, first of all, is who's there? Who are the communities down there? Who's working in this space? Are they already like involved, say, with the ARDC communities? Are they interested in getting involved with RDA and on a more global context? So who are they? Who are these new potential researchers, and what are the requirements? What are their issues, and what is the incentive for them to get involved? How can we really kind of like promote RDA as an organization, as a global organization? And what is it they need, and what is it I could do, I suppose, as a community manager to support that, but also with the support of the Secretariat and the full team. How do I go about communicating the benefits of people getting involved? We know what the benefits are, but how do you communicate that and provide that incentive? And is it topic dependent, or is it just more kind of getting involved with the community on a more broader scale? So I'm just me down there in Australia. There's a lot of I mean, Australia is a huge country. There's 5 academic institutions alone in Western Australia. I'm hosted at Curtin University. It has 1,400 research and academic staff. So yeah,
there's a lot to do.
It's that needle in the haystack problem, I think.
Yeah.
But I do have ARDC supporting.
And Catherine, can you, like, is there something you would pick out that RDA does well to support the community?
Yeah, I think it's really leveraging that national and international like strategies. So just really making the most of what countries do well on a national scale. So coming back to Australia and the ARDC and bringing that into the global context. I think the ARDC does that RDA, does that extremely well. And we've heard it before, and I think we'll hear it probably all week, that really supporting and fostering the grassroots approach to community engagement. It's extremely welcoming. And I think the RDA provides a really great mechanism for getting involved, producing creative content, making it available to the rest of the community.
Yeah, I think that's right, exactly. And really from the very beginning that we saw that internationalization and the bringing people together. I think that's right. Thanks, Catherine. Connie, to thanks, Catherine. And Connie, you also are new in the role. You're an RDA community manager as well. Can you tell us, why did you want to work with RDA? And what are the highlights of your role so far? I'm sure there's more to come. And looking that bit further into the future, is there something, or what would make you proud of RDA in 5-10 years' time?
Thank you, Sandra. I think already we've heard some wonderful reflections on the panel about how amazing the RDA as an organisation is. And I could go on and on about that, probably much longer than 5 minutes, on all of the positive things about the RDA. But personally, for me, it sounds a bit cliche, but it's almost a bit of a dream position to be a community manager for an organisation that's as global and as international and as diverse as this. So I thought that really everything the RDA stands for, its mission, its vision, its guiding principles, really closely aligns with my own personal goals of wanting to be able to support researchers, to raise awareness about the importance of data sharing and reuse. And I think a community manager's role is really to build those social bridges and also technical bridges as well, which is what the RDA wants to do, for these diverse stakeholders to really be able to achieve that goal. I also wanted to give something personally back to the RDA because it was an organisation that really inspired me as a PhD researcher. Back in 2019, I was studying my PhD, and it was actually Marta Taparek, if Marta's in the audience. So she's one of the long-standing members of the RDA who introduced me to the RDA as a researcher at the time. So I actually got an early career researcher grant to attend the 14th plenary in Helsinki. From that point, I joined Engaging Research with Data, which is an interest group, and I was part of a team that drafted a supporting output, which is the cookbook on engaging research with data management. So that experience of being part of the RDA membership, so seeing how it operates as a member, and really seeing the immense value that this community has for individuals, and particularly early career individuals, made me really excited to be able to come back. And I also got the flavour of what this volunteer community, this hardworking, motivated, dedicated community of individuals that actually do this aside their day jobs is really impressive. So to come back and be able to support the RDA in this role and continue to ride the wave and really evolve in this fast-paced research data landscape is really exciting for me. So I'm already touching on the highlights, I think. So I like people, I like working with people, and I like to be creative. And I think that's what community management offers, especially for the RDA. And I think some highlights at the moment, well, I've joined at a really timely moment with Catherine. It's the 10th anniversary this year, so it's a big milestone for the community. We've been working on a series of different events and activities to really commemorate this important milestone with the member community. And like Beth was talking about clustering, we've tried to also cluster some of the group work now. And that's been really interesting. And we've taken a thematic approach to these events. So for example, in February, we kicked off this year with a month dedicated to fair data, fair software and fair hardware. After the plenary, we're going to be moving on to medical, health and medical data. And then in May, it's metadata and technical infrastructure. And we've got, I think, already over 40 different activities, webinars, workshops, podcasts, that anybody really can also contribute. So anyone can propose an event. You don't even have to be an RDA member if you want to tap into the global RDA community. So I think that's been really exciting. And one of the things that Catherine and I have been working on as well, and I think also Maddie Areni in one of the opening plenary sessions, she spoke about these community cross-fertilization workshops. And the idea there is to bring similarly focused interest groups, working groups and communities of practice together, newly emerging communities of practice, to really talk about the future of the RDA over the next 5 to 10 years, to brainstorm challenges, to share solutions, initiatives, and think about concrete actions that the community can take forward. So that's a highlight, and I've been working with Catherine on those as well, so she should take credit for those as well. And I can't talk about highlights without mentioning also this new collaboration that we have with Oracle for Research. So Oracle are going to be supporting the facilitation of 2 working groups this year. So I'm really proud to also be facilitating those. We're going to have one that is domain agnostic, and that will kick off in April. And that's going to be looking at identifying methodologies and gaps for open data publication, access and sharing. And then there'll be a disciplinary working group towards the end of the year. And that'll be focused, I think, we're yet to be confirmed, but on multi-omics data, hopefully. And that's, for me, really exciting, because I think it's a bit of a taste of what we can hopefully see more of in the future, which is really engaging the private sector and harnessing the power of industry and injecting some professional, like, not that the RDA is not professional, but some services to really support the global volunteer effort. And I think that's where sustainability comes into the future. And then what can make me proud in the next 5 to 10 years? I feel quite honoured actually to be given that question, because there are people on this panel that are more established than me, and I'm sure they've got their own ideas. But I think if the RDA can even continue to evolve and to scale and remain impactful within the research data landscape like it has done over the past 10 years, that's something that I think we can all be proud of if we can achieve that. And I think Catherine's working on globalization. I think, you know, building that regional engagement, organizational membership within the Global South is going to be key. I think we can be proud if we can really raise the profile of the community work and efforts, harmonize and align what they're doing to remain impactful. And finally, something that's quite close to my own heart, and probably Julia's as well, is engaging early career individuals. I think that's going to be something that would make me proud if we can really help researchers navigate the RDA and get the benefit.
Thanks, Connie. I know that's great. There's a lot going on there. So and a lot. So I think on that question of like what makes you proud, I think for our founding members to be here and see this family to have grown to, it's got all the aunts and uncles and the whole crew here at 13,000 members. There's a lot to be proud of, and there's a lot going on that we can look forward to in the future. So I have another question or two for the panel to think about. And I know Alessandra is helping us in the audience as well. So if you're thinking of a question, get ready. We might ask you for it. And that's the same for our hundreds of people joining us online as well. I'm going to come back to that Riding the Wave report, because I think it really was visionary, and it, you know, it was instrumental in getting us here. And thinking of so one of the original goals of Riding the Wave was that all the stakeholders, from scientists to national authority, we talked about politicians, the general public, that everyone is aware of the critical importance of conserving and sharing reliable data produced during the research process. So my question is, like a kid in the back of the car, are we nearly there yet?
Started. That's not true. You have started, but I think it was one of the speakers earlier on was saying there's a long, long way to go. I think it was the Riding Wave report, we said that this should be taught at primary school, data literacy. And I still believe that's where it should be taught because you've got minds. And one of the things successfully tried to do with the European Commission is to have a program linking primary schools across the world to share data, because they had these other programs for teachers and others to do things. But every morning measuring the rainfall or anything, the pollen count, doesn't matter what it is, it's irrelevant. But they start to understand how different cultures see things. And one of the things I learned from both S3 and RDA is that different cultures see things in different ways. You can see the same data, but you interpret it in a cultural context.
Yes.
And you really do need to get over that. I think that in that area, there's an awful long way to go. I happen to have other views about education, but everybody does. But actually, certainly in the UK, it's become highly compartmentalized. And in fact, the reason I can't stay tomorrow is I'm helping a group look at how you science data in the context of history and theology.
Nice.
So, great. I can have fun like that. You've all got jobs to do. But I believe we've got to break down some of these silos, and the data is part of that.
I think that's right. And it's one of my favorite things being here at the RDA conference, because I guess we have other conferences and groups that we engage with, but everybody is here. So all those disciplines and really that cross-cutting. Did anybody else want to jump in on, are we nearly there yet? Julia?
Yes, so not regarding the education or policies or something, but a real big barrier I personally see is that, at least in Germany, the public discussion about data sharing is often influenced by this misconception that openly sharing data means always that there's a data privacy breach, which I do not think is correct. So I think it's really important to communicate to the public that with the right infrastructural changes and approaches, data protection can even be better than it is today. Because I think the current lack of infrastructure to openly share data just leads researchers to choose ways to share data that are not okay. So actually this leads to data breaches, and creating an infrastructure for openly sharing data would, as I said, support data protection.
I think so, and getting that message across, as you say, that there are different ways to share data, and the level of openness is as appropriate. Ross, were you going to say something there?
Always. I was kind of trying to hold off, but I'll jump in. John talked about the success of the Riding Wave report by not writing it himself, by getting an expert in communicating value to a very particular audience. And I think that's what we need next. I think we need an expert in communicating value to more than just the few early career researchers, but to a very large group of early career researchers. Because whilst RDA is successful now, it won't be successful if early career researchers don't have access to the value of RDA. And they won't have that access because you were lucky in some ways, I think. And some of your colleagues have been lucky to kind of get access. So how do we take away the luck element, and how do we make it the case that we can offer, so jumping forward to something else, a lovely present for RDA to the future would be a communication to the future, to you, of the value of picking up the RDA expertise, advice community, etc. But it has to be done by somebody who's really expert at communicating that value, which is almost certainly not John, and I know it's not me. So where will that expertise be, and how does it get used?
Yeah, I think that's really good, Ross. Like, I was really struck by Connie's point that somebody gave a gift to Connie of the early research grant to come to the conference, and now we get the gift back of her committing to working for the RDA. So there's, that gift is a future proofing, exactly. So, and the communication is key too. Go Beth and then John.
Okay.
Mm.
Let me ask you a question back. Okay, so how do you account for, I agree with that, so how do you communicate the message of, well, not the message, because I think the value is in a number of forms, but that's a continually changing set. It's a continually changing value proposition. So how does what would be your recommendation on communicating over time?
Well, I think you'd start by asking early career researchers what they value. You'd ask early career researchers what they need, and then you'd have a professional look at what RDA does and communicate back. So you start by asking, so this is a very good start, but then you bring in considerable expertise. I just reflect on how powerful the Riding the Wave report was in Europe in convincing a very particular audience, relatively small number, resident in very particular location, I can think of where. So this is a much bigger task, of course, to communicate to a very broad range, and maybe expert will say, well, you actually need to have several different channels and you'll need to do these things differently. But I actually think it's quite crucial, because we heard yesterday from Hans about the risks associated with what RDA is doing, and that it continues at the current pace won't be fast enough. Because I think, as Natasha showed, the world's changed a lot over the last 10 years. We can be sure it will change more over the next 10. So the speed of engagement will need to rise in ways that we can't imagine.
And maybe just if I can add to that point as well, I think that involving the early career individuals, so that's, the researchers, data supporters, infrastructure providers as a general broad group, will help us, in my opinion, to be able to adapt quite quickly, because they are the people working, like the boots on the ground, if you like, that deal with the challenges every day. So I think that it's got to be a marriage between the RDA and those people if we're going to continue to keep, adapting and evolving.
Yeah, I think so. John, you wanted to jump in as well.
Sandra, you don't realise how important Ireland was in all this process.
I don't think
because our initial conversations with Carlos and Costas took place in the Irish pubs in Brussels.
be anywhere in the world.
But also, when we came to the data harvest report, by then the commissioner was Mary Gagan Quinn, the Irish commissioner. And with respect to another report, but it's always remained with me, if you want to get your message over, have no more than 10 recommendations, preferably a prime number, make it 7. And if you look at the data harvest report, just look at the last recommendation. I think it's one word: don't. Basically, don't interfere. This is a movement you can't stop. Actually, there are a few more lines, but that's the journalist. How many of us would dare write something like that as a recommendation? Don't. And when I was before the European Competitiveness Council, I said, you're not going to understand this. Don't get in the way. And that was my message to them. They've started getting in the way now. That's how it is. But just think about every person here should have a 15-second statement that they can make to the politician in the lift. And if you've got more than that, I mean, Francoise and I know this. We had one of the members of the Riding Wave group, Peter Wittenberg, wonderful guy, totally disruptive, wonderful to have. But, if we hadn't got the minutiae of his point in, we all had to eat humble pie and let the journalist do it. His name was Rich Hudson from Science Business. You can get their bi-weekly, twice weekly report free of charge. It's like the RDA. It's well worth getting. Tells you all that's going on.
And I think that challenge of the right communication at the right time is so key. Like, it's just critical. Can I want to make sure to take a question from the floor or online, because we only have a few minutes left. Alessandra.
Yes, we have a question online from Rita Sitorus. In sharing some sensitive research data, for example, genomics data, among the RDA members, is there any specific requirements compared to non-sensitive data?
So I think that's quite a technical question, and I'm sure I wonder if that is one for offline, or does anybody want to jump in just very briefly? Because Julia, you mentioned it, and I guess the RDA is exactly the right place to bring these sort of conversations to.
Yeah, I would observe only that in looking at the interest group and working group activities, that topic is well covered, and I would advise the person to engage there.
I think that's it, Beth, exactly. So look at the recommendations and get involved in the conversation as well, isn't it? Is there, oh, there's one there. It's Francoise has a right to reply to John.
John,
Hi,
yes, it's about communication. I would like to add another level because RDA world is complex and there are many things in it. There is the regional and national communication, which I think is absolutely key because you have to adapt the message to what is going on locally in a given country. And then if you have enough relays in the country, they push it locally in their university or organization. So I really think I completely agree with you about early career researchers, but you are not the only ones. And if we want to change the culture, you are the future. But presently, we also have to address other levels and adapting to the local conditions. If there is a national policy around open science, we have to find how the RDA fits with it or how RDA can guide it somehow. And I really think it's another key level for communication to increase the impact and to bring more people to the RDA spirit somehow.
Yeah.
Francois, yeah, thank you for that comment. I think it's an important comment. I do think we all as researchers work in the context of our universities and our federal funding agencies, so we can't ignore what's going on there. If I can make a comment in the United States, I do see, I'll say finally, I see hopeful progress in the United States. We have our Office of Science Technology Policy, which is associated with our White House, that issued a statement that this was the year of open science. I'm wearing a little button here on NASA's Open Science, TOPS Open Science initiative, which is gaining quite a bit of visibility. And I'm also seeing response by institutions, academic institutions that are recognizing the need to be more responsive where they haven't been before. I mean, these are federal agencies, at least in the United States, which is my view, and universities are like sleeping giants, and ours is both have been like a sleeping giant when it comes to issues of open science and data sharing. And I'm starting to see an awakening. So I do think, I'm, as the lead of RDA US going forward, reorienting what we're doing in RDA US to focus on specifically this topic. I think the time is right for this. And so I'm looking forward to, one more point here. I'm looking forward to this initiative. And I would say those of you in Europe who have adopted RDA policies, please leave the breadcrumbs for us. We talk about curation of data and lineage trails. Our processes are important. Leave breadcrumbs for us so that we can make these compelling arguments within our own region. So thank you in advance for your help.
Thanks, Beth. Catherine and then Ross.
Same goes for Australia.
We'll talk.
I just wanted to add to this. So when Connie and I have been planning these cross-fertilization workshops, we've been thinking, well, how do we approach this? We've got Australia, Europe, US, we have a time zone challenge. So to grow the community in the global south, we obviously want to connect that community with the global community, Europe, US, elsewhere. But it sounds trivial. It's not a trivial challenge to get everyone in one place at the same time, apart from these wonderful plenaries, but we can all be together and have conversations. So do we focus on a regional discussion? Do we focus on just an Australia only kind of discussion, or do we try and bring Australia into the global picture? And we've when we did the fair data one in February, we made it work, didn't we? Early for Connie, late for me. But is that something that should be continued, or should we do it more regionally, or a bit of both, perhaps? I think
Yeah.
there's some discussions to have on that.
Exactly, Catherine. I think if we can do both, it's brilliant. I think. Ross.
I just wanted to celebrate. Yes, I wanted to celebrate, though, how well RDA has worked in the sense of the first 3 talks we had today. We saw a really powerful description of the effect RDA was having in Indonesia, and then Australia, and then Sweden, and they were all really, really different.
Yeah.
So absolutely, you have to pay attention to local conditions, but they're a reason to celebrate that we have seen each of those experiences show that RDA is relevant to different places in quite different ways.
John, last
We
answer.
remember this when we were meeting in the monastery. Cultural differences were coming through quite strongly, and we broke into 2 groups: a Francophone group and an Anglophone group. We went walking in the woods in separate ways, and we melded them together. We acknowledged that there were differences. The thing is not to try and meld them all together to be the same, otherwise you get the lowest common denominator. So I'm really grateful to Francois and the others that went off and spoke French, had left the rest of us out. But by bringing them together at the end, we got the highest thinking, not the lowest. And one of the, I mean, this is almost 1981, I spent a short sabbatical at the University of Kyoto. It changed my mindset completely on how research was done around the world and how people think. Just drop everything and go somewhere different.
Yeah. I thought of that when you first said the monastery, John. I was thinking of that privilege of being able to create space to spend together and to talk and think together. I love it. And I'm going to finish the panel with a last thought. We have a saying that our Irish president really loves, and it struck me so much when Hilary was talking this morning. And it is to say in the Irish language, Ní nearthlachar le chéile, which what it means is that the strength is in working together. And I felt that so much in this room. And now I see it is, we feel the same here in this panel. So can I ask you to thank the panel before we do a very special. I have one last very special surprise nobody knows about. So let me welcome our chair of the RDA Council. I'm going to take this one, thanks Connie, and invite Ingrid Dillo to join us on stage. Ingrid, I give you this.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ingrid Dillo, and together with Jill Ben, I am co-chairing the Council of RDA. And I'm going to steal away a couple of minutes of this lovely panel. And I hope you will stay in the room for a little while, because today is the 10th anniversary of RDA. And you already heard a lot of very interesting and exciting talks from our panel members and from people who were there from day one on. But there is one other person who has been very much involved in RDA from day one. And that very special person I would like to call out on stage now. And that is our wonderful Secretary General, Hilary Hannahome. And there she is. My dearest Hilary, you have been involved, like I said, from day one on. Come a little bit closer here. Don't go so far away. You're center stage now. And you have been there for 10 years in different capacities. From day one in Secretariat, and since 2018, already for 5 years as our wonderful Secretary General. 10 years also means 10 plenary events. And I am sure that I can say that you co-organized, planned and attended all plenaries but one. And that one was the 5th birthday of RDA, celebrated in Montreal. So it's very good that you are here now for its 10th birthday and you didn't miss that party. And you even went, and that shows your dedication to the cause, to Australia, just on the brink of the COVID pandemic, to arrive there almost all alone. So it's wonderful that we can repeat that in 2025, I think, and do it properly, right? So all of this shows that if there is one person really whose whole heart and soul is in this organization, I think it is you. And through all of these years, you have shown a tremendous dedication, especially, I think, to the RDA community. You have been fundamental in connecting people and also in building the organization. And what I admire personally very, very much is that you always remember us of the core principles of RDA, the guiding principles that are central stage. And you dream about them, you preach them, but you don't only preach them, you also live by them. And that is something that I personally find fantastic. So after 10 years, I think it's safe to say that RDA has become part of your DNA. 10th birthday, and that is a good opportunity to thank you very, very much, I think, and I hope on behalf of everybody in the room, everybody online, and all of the other wonderful members of this RDA family. And of course, you know that birthdays come with presents. So on behalf of the whole of council, we have a small token for you to show our appreciation. And I would like to ask the whole audience to give Hillary a huge round of applause.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, but so thank you. That's very generous and kind and a surprise. And you all know I get really emotional. So the passionate part of me allows me to do this job every day. I always say it, I'm really lucky. I love my job and I'm privileged to have it. And I'm very privileged to work on behalf of a community like you. So thank you, but for the gift and for the thought and the wonderful photo. Even my children are there and some lovely photos with the previous Secretary General, Mark Parsons, who's here as well, and lovely memories. But I thank you for making my life and my work life really wonderful. It's a pleasure and a privilege to represent you. Thank you.
We're waiting for you to cry. So thank you very much, everyone. That was just such a lovely surprise. I'm really sorry if we cut your questions short. I think it was worth it. Please enjoy your lunch.